For decades, there was one unspoken law that every computer maker on Earth obeyed without question. You didn't build a laptop. You didn't build a desktop. You built a Windows machine, because there was no other option that mattered. That rule wasn't written into any contract you could read. It was written into the bones of the entire industry. And for 30 years, nobody dared to break it. But right now, in 2026, something is happening inside the walls of the world's largest PC makers that very few people are talking about openly. And the ones who are talking about it are choosing their words very, very carefully. Because here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to say out loud yet. The operating system war that everyone assumed was over, permanently, has quietly reopened. And the company standing closest to the blast radius isn't some startup nobody's heard of. It's Microsoft. Let that sink in for a second. Microsoft, the company that built the most dominant software monopoly in the history of computing. The company whose name became a verb. Just Windows it. That company is now watching its own hardware partners edge toward the exit door, one strategic announcement at a time. Not with a slammed door, not with a press release screaming betrayal. Quietly, professionally. The way real power shifts always happen. Not with an explosion, but with a slow, deliberate withdrawal that nobody notices until it's already finished. So what actually triggered this, what most people are not seeing, is that this isn't really about hatred for Windows. It's about something far more dangerous for Microsoft. Irrelevance. And irrelevance doesn't arrive with a warning siren. It arrives disguised as innovation. Start here. In February of this year, HP, one of the 2 or 3 companies that literally kept Windows alive on store shelves for 3 decades, began quietly rolling out something that should have made headlines everywhere, but somehow didn't get the attention it deserved. HP started deploying agentic AI built in partnership with OpenAI across its entire device fleet. Not as a gimmick, not as a marketing checkbox, as infrastructure, as the new operating layer sitting on top of and increasingly around the operating system itself. Read that again. On top of and around the operating system itself. Because here's where it gets worse for Microsoft. HP isn't just buying an AI chatbot license and slapping a logo on a keyboard. It is building what analysts are now calling the management plane, the intelligent layer that watches, reasons over, and eventually controls the behavior of every device flowing through its business. And HP has a lot of devices flowing through its business. More than 80% of HP's revenue moves through its partner network. Over 100,000 partners logging into HP's systems, managing fleets, deploying machines into hospitals, banks, government offices, schools. That's not a rounding error. That's the backbone of the corporate computing world. Now think about what that actually means. If HP succeeds in building an AI layer that reasons over device telemetry, security posture, application usage, crash behavior, and fleet-wide operations, a layer that belongs to HP, not to Microsoft, then something profound shifts. The operating system stops being the thing that matters most. The intelligence layer above it becomes the thing that matters most. And whoever owns that layer owns the relationship with the customer, not Microsoft. HP, this is not chaos, this is strategy. For 3 decades, Microsoft controlled the PC industry through a simple mechanism. It owned the layer that everyone had to pass through. You couldn't get to your files, your apps, your internet connection without going through Windows first. That chokehold was the entire business model. But if HP, and companies like HP, successfully build an AI-driven fleet intelligence system that customers start to associate with value, with security, with productivity, the chokehold loosens. Windows becomes something that simply exists underneath, the way an engine exists underneath a car's dashboard. Nobody brags about the engine anymore. They brag about the software running on top of it. And this is where everything changes, because HP is not acting alone. Behind this shift sits a partner that should terrify Redmond more than any court ruling ever could. OpenAI, the same company that built the tool millions of people now open before they open anything else on their desktop. The same company whose products are being deliberately redesigned, according to people close to the matter, to work asynchronously, meaning the AI doesn't wait for you to type a question anymore. It works in the background, constantly, silently, making decisions and suggestions before you even realize you needed them. Imagine that capability sitting not just inside a browser tab, but wired directly into the hardware layer of one of the world's largest PC manufacturers. That is not a feature update. That is a power transfer. According to informed observers tracking enterprise IT infrastructure, this single shift, AI reasoning embedded at the device management level, could determine who controls the next decade of corporate computing. Not the company that makes the prettiest start menu. The company that owns the intelligence sitting on top of the hardware. And right now, that company increasingly looks like it might not be Microsoft. But let's rewind, because Microsoft's problem didn't start this year. It started years ago, in ways the average user experienced directly and complained about loudly, even if nobody connected the dots to what was coming. Windows 11 was supposed to be a triumph. Instead, it became one of the most contentious operating system rollouts in Microsoft's history. Hardware requirements that quietly declared tens of millions of perfectly functional PCs incompatible, forced feature pushes that users didn't ask for, advertising embedded into a paid operating system, a relentless campaign to funnel users toward Microsoft's own AI assistant, whether they wanted it or not. Each of these decisions on their own looked survivable. Microsoft has weathered user frustration before, but here's what most people are not seeing. Frustration doesn't just disappear, it accumulates. And accumulated frustration at the enterprise level eventually becomes a procurement decision. Think about what that means for a company like HP or Dell or Lenovo. Their entire consumer base, millions of IT departments, small businesses, and everyday users, has spent years absorbing every controversial decision Microsoft makes because there was no real alternative. But no real alternative is a fragile kind of dominance. It only survives as long as nobody builds the alternative. And in 2026, the alternative is finally being built. Not as an act of rebellion, but as an act of self-preservation. Because these hardware companies watched something happen that should worry every legacy tech giant on Earth. The value in computing has been quietly migrating away from the operating system layer and toward the intelligence layer. This is the real story. Not a single dramatic betrayal, a slow, structural migration of power. And it isn't just HP. Look sideways, across the industry, and the pattern starts repeating in ways that are hard to dismiss as coincidence. ARM-based devices, chips originally built for phones, not laptops, have spent the last several years eating into a market Intel and Microsoft once considered permanently theirs. Longer battery life, cooler operation, silent instant-on computing that doesn't behave like a traditional PC at all. And crucially, ARM-based machines don't require the same tight, decades-old dependency on x86 Windows architecture that built Microsoft's original empire. Every ARM device sold is, in a quiet, mathematical sense, a small crack in the foundation Microsoft built its entire hardware alliance on top of. But here's where it gets worse. This isn't the first time a major hardware partner has openly discussed detaching itself from the Windows-Intel alliance that ran the industry for 30 years. Go back and look at what happened when HP, under a previous leadership era, stood in front of its own customer conference and openly admitted the Wintel era, the tightly bound partnership between Windows and Intel that had defined the last 3 decades of the industry, was being challenged by ARM. The company's own leadership stood on stage with Microsoft's own chief executive watching by video link and said the quiet part out loud, this 30-year partnership needed, in her words, a little rejuvenation. That moment came and went, absorbed by the news cycle, filed away as just another executive soundbite. But rejuvenation is a polite corporate word for something much less comfortable, renegotiation of power. And now, over a decade later, that renegotiation isn't a threat anymore. It's underway. Here's the part that should genuinely alarm anyone paying close attention to enterprise technology strategy. This isn't happening in a vacuum. It's happening at the exact moment Microsoft is fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously. Regulators across multiple continents are scrutinizing how deeply Microsoft has woven its AI products into its operating system and productivity suite, questioning whether that bundling represents the same kind of anti-competitive behavior that got the company in serious legal trouble decades ago. Every dollar Microsoft spends defending those bundling practices in front of regulators is a dollar not spent building the next competitive advantage. Every headline about antitrust scrutiny is a headline that makes hardware partners nervous about being too tightly bound to a single, legally exposed ecosystem. And regulators aren't the only ones asking uncomfortable questions. Enterprise customers, the actual buyers who sign the massive contracts that keep this entire industry profitable, are increasingly asking a version of the same question. Why are we locked into one vendor's AI, one vendor's cloud? This is where the story stops being about software features and starts being about something much bigger, control over the future of enterprise computing itself. The data, at scale, is arguably more valuable than the operating system license fee that built Microsoft's original empire. Data is the new licensing revenue. And right now, hardware partners are racing to make sure that data, and the intelligence built on top of it, flows through systems they control, not systems Microsoft controls. This is the quiet war nobody is broadcasting on the evening news. Not a war of press releases and dramatic resignations. A war of infrastructure decisions being made in boardrooms and partnership agreements, in the fine print of enterprise contracts being signed right now, this month, this quarter. Azure alone generates staggering revenue every quarter. Microsoft's own AI products, tightly integrated into its productivity suite, remain deeply embedded in corporate workflows across the world. This isn't a company on the verge of collapse. According to people who track enterprise technology strategy closely, the real signal to watch isn't a single dramatic headline. It's the accumulation of smaller decisions. Which company builds the AI layer customers actually interact with daily, Which company owns the fleet management intelligence that IT departments depend on? Which company gets positioned as the smart layer versus the legacy layer underneath it? Every one of those small decisions made this year, this quarter, inside partnership agreements most consumers will never read, is quietly redrawing the map of who holds power in this industry for the next decade. And here's the punchline that should sit uncomfortably with anyone who assumed Microsoft's dominance was permanent. Empires rarely fall because of a single attack. They fall because the layer they were standing on top of quietly stops being the layer that matters. Think about what happened to companies that once seemed just as untouchable. Think about how quickly the phone company stopped mattering once smartphones redefined what a phone even was. Think about how quickly cable television's grip loosened once streaming reorganized where value actually lived. In every case, the incumbent didn't get destroyed by a competitor building a better version of the same thing. They got outflanked by a competitor who redefined which layer of the system actually mattered. That is exactly the pattern forming right now around Microsoft. Not a direct assault on Windows. Not a rival operating system storming the gates with a flashy new interface. Something quieter and far more dangerous. A redefinition of what layer of the computing stack actually holds the power. And the partners who once needed Microsoft more than Microsoft needed them are the ones leading that redefinition. One AI deployment, one enterprise contract, one fleet management platform at a time. So what happens next? Nobody, not analysts, not insiders, not the executives making these decisions themselves, can say with certainty how this plays out over the next 18 months. Will Microsoft respond by deepening its own AI integration so aggressively that it reclaims the intelligence layer before its partners fully escape its orbit? Will regulatory pressure slow that response down at exactly the moment speed matters most? Will HP's bet on agentic AI infrastructure actually deliver the kind of value that convinces enterprise customers to shift loyalty? Or will it stall out as just another ambitious pilot program that never scales? Will other hardware giants, Dell, Lenovo, the ARM ecosystem players circling from the outside, accelerate their own versions of this quiet detachment, turning what looks today like an isolated strategic maneuver into an industry-wide realignment? Nobody can answer that yet. What can be said with confidence is this: the assumption that powered 30 years of computing history, that Windows and the PC industry are permanently, structurally inseparable, is no longer something anyone in this industry is willing to take for granted. And once an assumption like that starts cracking, even quietly, even without headlines screaming about it, the entire foundation underneath it becomes something worth watching very, very closely. Because the next time you turn on a computer, open a laptop, boot up a machine at work, ask yourself a question almost nobody's asking out loud yet. Is the operating system still the thing running your device? Or is it just the thing your device is still, for now, running on top of? That question doesn't have an answer yet. But somewhere inside Microsoft's Redmond headquarters, and inside boardrooms at HP, and inside the strategy meetings of every major hardware maker watching this unfold, that question is being asked constantly, right now, in rooms the public will never see. And how it gets answered over the next year may quietly determine who actually controls the next era of computing, long before any of us are told the decision has already been made.